But there are things in my life that I look back and I at the time I wanted them to go in a particular way. And now that I look back, I think, thank God it didn't work out the way I thought that it should. Because ultimately we don't know any better. We really don't. And with that same grain of salt, it's too soon for us to judge what is or what is not. And that includes our own identity. Whether I think I'm dumb, or I think I'm not enough, or I think I should do more, or I think I'm too lazy, or whatever that's been put in our head.
So here's the big question. How do everyday people like us who didn't grow up wealthy and were not taught how to be wealthy in school, how are we supposed to learn to think, invest, and grow wealth like the top 1% without compromising our ethics and our values? My name is Jeremy Whaley. That was my big question. This podcast will give you the answers. You're listening to Think Rich Radio. And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Think Rich Radio. Brand new episode with myself, your host, Jeremy Whaley, and my co-host, Nelson Bran. Nelson, it is great to be with you today. How are you?
Unbelievable. I had a steak the size of my face, so I feel incredible.
Well, that means you're probably ready for a little food coma. I don't know.
I am, but I feel great, brother. How are you, buddy? How's everything?
I'm good. Somehow I had lasagna twice today, which never happens. I probably don't have lasagna once a month, and I managed to have it twice today. So I'm feeling rather stuffed myself. All right, in this episode, we're going to talk about personal responsibility. We both have strong views on this, especially in the context of what does it take to be successful, this whole narrative of what does it take to think like the top 1% without compromising our ethics and values. You know, a lot of people have in their mind that if you're going to be a top earner, you're earning 600, 800,000 a year, $1 million a year, the only way that people get to that top level, that top echelon in society is they cheat and they steal and they hurt people. And then they also have this idea that they're hoarding on the other side. And, you know, that's just not true. It's the furthest thing from the truth. I know that, you know it. Let's have the conversation and talk about that. And I'm going to let you tee it off.
You know, I feel like we take that approach in order to feel better about ourselves. And I'll admit to you that once upon a time, I too thought that. There was a moment in time in college that I was told, well, Nelson, why wouldn't we simply tax the wealthy more in order to pay for the sick, the infirm, the elderly, those who cannot work for XYZ reason? Why not take from the rich and give to the poor? In a theoretical sense and within a classroom, it made perfect sense to me. And it wasn't until I got out, I developed a company, I got married, I bought a house, that I quickly saw that what sounded right in school as a theory was absolutely incorrect in real life. It didn't translate at all. In fact, I started noticing that it wasn't giving money to those who could not work. It was mostly giving money to those who simply decided not to have to work. And so it changed my whole paradigm immediately. But yeah, this notion of self-responsibility, it's something that I feel that our system says you don't have to try as hard. We've developed a series of safety nets for you in case for whatever reason it doesn't come out the way that you planned. And we not only use those safety nets, which sometimes a person needs. Maybe somebody's ill, maybe there's a divorce, maybe there's a sudden death. Some sort of tragedy occurs. Everyone's going to need it every moon and again. But for some people, it's become a way of life, and it's become generational. And so this notion of self-responsibility, I got this, I can do this, was given away to a third-party dependence on government, is my opinion. And in order for us to feel better about it, it's easier to say, well, you know, I did my best. It's all I got. It's the system. It's my mom and dad. It's my boss. It's my industry. Or it's my skin color. That's why they don't like me. You know, so we made a series of excuses as to why it hasn't worked out for us.
Yeah, I was a liberal in college for about a month. I grew up very conservative. And then I kind of was like, you know, hey, what's wrong with these other people? And then I tried that for a little bit. And I was like, that's not me either. And where I finally landed is very much what I would call a libertarian today. But what triggered that was the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And what I learned in Think and Grow Rich, I was probably 22 or 23 when I read it for the first time. I'm not even sure how I picked it up, but I picked it up at Borders Books, which, doesn't even exist anymore. And I sat down in the coffee shop. Back then, I was in the habit of sitting down and getting a mocha and reading. And I sat there and I couldn't put it down. And I read until they shut the store down and they kicked me out. I came home, I sat on my couch, I read until I passed out. I woke up and I finished reading the book. It's the first book in my entire life that I ever read cover to cover like that. And what I took from Think and Grow Rich, that in, all the 12 years of elementary, middle school, and high school, 5 years at college, because I squeezed 4 years into 5, and growing up in America, the greatest country in world history. What I took from Napoleon Hill and Think and Grow Rich for the first time was a philosophy of the American dream. If you can think it, if you can conceive it, if you can believe it, you can achieve it. And it was the first time I really actually understood that we can be, do, and have anything we want, but it requires us. It requires us to think about it. It requires us to take it and to claim it. And it's like Jim Rohn used to say, if you don't make the plans for your life, somebody else will. And I've seen their plans. They're not very good. Most people are letting somebody else make the plans for their life, and they wonder why they don't like the results. It's because they didn't take the responsibility to step into it and say, nope, I'm going to design the life of my dreams, and then go do it.
And I'll tell you, and it sounds so practical. It sounds so easy, Jeremy, that way. But the reality is that we've been taught that we cannot design our lives, that we don't have that capacity, we don't have the necessary education to do so, and therefore we have to put it in the hands of our parents, our generation, our professors, our industry. And so everyone's designing our lives except ourselves.
That's right.
And again, it goes back to the fear doctrine, to the doubt. Who am I, Jeremy, to design my life? Now, I have in fact designed my life exactly the way I've wanted to, and I admit it to you. I'm filling journals all the time, and that's the only way. I had to do a self-discovery journey. I had to run a self-diagnostics, right? And then I got to weigh out what was true and what was not. There are things that my father and my mentors and my professors and anybody older than myself as I was on my journey told me that didn't prove to be true.
Yeah.
And I was able to remove them. So we get to design our lives only once we realize that it's our lives to live. Only when we realize that some of the notions in our mind that we think are values and we think they're non-negotiables, they were something that was simply repeated to us when we were young, over and over and over and over again, that we think those are those are our values. No, they're not. No, they're not. They were put there by a system that wants to make us a very obedient, docile worker, non-complaining worker, period.
Yeah, absolutely. You're totally correct. And so many people did that. They implanted those ideas with good intentions, but just because they had good intentions, it didn't mean that it was the boundary or the rule that I needed to have running my life. And I'll give you a couple of examples here. When I was growing up, I was dyslexic. We didn't know it. Nobody talked about it back in my day. I'm Gen X. We grew up drinking out of the water hose because we were locked out of the house. So they just treated us like we should be reading better. And the way that my parents framed it, they didn't want me to feel bad about myself. So I remember my parents, with great intention, they said, well, some people are just a little slower. And I latched onto that as a second grader. And that became my identity. And all the way through middle school and high school, I was a steady C student. I always got a C, or I might have just barely got a C. I never got B's. I never got A's. Not because I couldn't, but because I believed that C was good enough. My parents said it was good enough. You might be a little slower. My handwriting was really bad early on. I mean, I'm 49 this year. Next month, I'm turning 49. To this day, my father still looks at handwriting that I do and says, wow, that's really good. I can really read that. I'm like, well, I'm an adult now. Thanks, Dad. Um, but I was in college, and because my test scores were not where they wanted them to be, they put me in a remedial class for less intelligent kids. And about halfway through that semester, I realized how stupid it was. Like that was the first time that I was no longer with all the normal kids being treated as, hey, C's good enough. Now I'm with all the average or below average kids being treated like, well, here's how you get good enough. And something clicked. Like it was about halfway through my freshman year and something clicked. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to try. I'm just going to see what would happen if I got straight A's for a semester. And I did it and I went out. And what I had no idea is that I actually have a way higher than average IQ. Now as an adult, I know that. Now I've done all these things and I've, refined that. But for 12 years, 10 years of my growing up years, I had an identity that was given to me by somebody else. And most of us live that way. We live with somebody else's identity on us. And what's fascinating in the human mind, there's really not a force that's greater than the need to prove to ourselves who we are. To remain consistent with that identity. So if you have an identity that you're poor, you're going to do whatever it takes to reemphasize that I'm poor. If you have an identity that I'm slower than everybody else and I'm a C student, I'm going to do whatever it takes to reemphasize that identity. Why? Because it's our identity. But what happens, Nelson, when we change our identity from things are happening to me? What if we change one word from happening to me to happening for me? And what if we change the idea that I'm not who I am, I make who I am? That little shift changes everything.
I love that. Right now, you said happening to me. A lot of times in our lives, we want things to go in a particular way. I'm 56, so I'm a little crunchier than you, my friend. But I'm also Gen X, and I've also drank water from a water hose. But there are things in my life that I look back and I at the time I wanted them to go in a particular way. And now that I look back, I think, thank God it didn't work out the way I thought that it should. Because ultimately we don't know any better. We really don't. And with that same grain of salt, it's too soon for us to judge what is or what is not. And that includes our own identity. Whether I think I'm dumb, or I think I'm not enough, or I think I should do more, or I think I'm too lazy, or whatever that's been put in our head. Before this thing turned on, you and I were talking about the public school system. And I was saying to you that it was purposefully done. We were treated like an assembly line where all the tables and chairs in a straight line. You have to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. You have to memorize dates, and whatever the material is in the book or the teacher's giving, provided we can regurgitate it, we get an A grade. So that standardized testing and the qualifications, it's a metric that doesn't make any sense, because at any point it wasn't a let's learn to debate, let's learn logic, let's learn philosophy, let's learn to look for fallacies, let's learn to talk about leadership qualities, and let's learn about those things. Even the learning of the Constitution before the 1900s, you got to learn about the Federalist Papers, and you got to tear apart the Constitution in great detail so that the students knew what to expect from their government. But the government wasn't about to, after the 1900s, teach the people how to defend themselves against the government. Right. So they changed it so that suddenly all you do is learn about the three branches and a little bit about each one of them, but that's it. So there's a school system that embedded, after a few generations, a system that says schooling is necessary, college is necessary, and compliance is necessary. And these are indivisible. But what they do is they disempower the person from being able to ever have an identity of their own. And, and just not to jump too far, but this is another reason why we're kept so busy. Things are so loud. The noise is constant, and the entertainment is never ending. Because we never get that moment to be quiet, to be alone, and to think about these things and write them out so that we can say, oh, This isn't true. This isn't true. This I like. This I'll use, and go from there, right?
Yeah, and it's even worse today. We have so much entertainment in the palm of our hands and with our phones and our iPads and, all the different stimulants that come in. It's just, I don't know how kids today are going to ever balance it. But, you
Yeah.
said a couple of things that I want to pick up on. The idea that they've told us how to think, they've told us what we should think, they've told us the American dream is to own a home. Is that really the American dream? The beautiful thing about America, whether you love it or hate it, whichever side of the coin you sit on, America is a land where you can be, do, and have anything you want, but you still have to go claim it. You still have to go do it. And, we call this think rich radio. What's the difference in the top 1% and the other 99%, where the top 1% seem to be acquiring all the wealth and the other 99% seem to be running the programming? What does it take to break the programming and get into the top 1%? It's actually that little of a shift. But we've been so indoctrinated with do it this way that we missed the idea that in the American dream, they said anybody can do it. Anybody can be the president. Anybody can, fly an airplane or fly to Mars or whatever. But then they turned around and said, but probably not you. You should do this. You should do that. And so the question then becomes, I do this with my coaching students whenever I'm working with somebody one-on-one, I'm always listening for what's that belief that comes up. It always follows the I am, like I am this, I am that, or this always happens to me. So the question I like to ask is, what if it were not true? So that's where you start to you pull the thread right there. Oh, I am just an attorney. I am just this or whatever. Well, what if that weren't true? What if you're not that dumb? What if you're not just an average student? Who could you be without that story? And that's what you're saying, Nelson. They indoctrinated us with good intentions, but that became identity. And now, before you know it, we actually remove our onus of responsibility and put it on the story that someone else gave us. Did I understand? That's exactly what you said, right?
It is. However, I don't know if it was with the best of intents. I want you to remember that Standard Oil was owned by Rockefeller, and he started the standardized education system that we have to this very day in 1903. And he backed B.F. Skinner. He backed Dewey. And what did he do when he did those? He created very well-trained, compliant, obedient workers. And that's all they were after. Because he didn't just go after the oil. He had the oil, he had the trains that delivered the oil, he had the refineries, he had the end products, he had the entire monopoly, the whole vertical of that entire industry. So he needed workers at every end who were never going to question what they were going to do. He wanted someone who could do repetitive work, because that's what a school does. A school puts you in these regiments of timing. You got to be in class at a particular time. You got a quiz on this day. You got a test on another day. You're competing among yourselves for this A, B, C, or D grade. We're graded. All of that is an assembly line. There's a bell that tells you to come in or go out. You have to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. All the tables and chairs are in straight lines. All the hallways are white. The interior of the classrooms are all white. It has one purpose. It's creating a human being into a little piece of data. And you can use it and reuse it and refine it as necessary in order to create a machine that doesn't question anything. All we are is fed information, and then we regurgitate it, and we want an A. And it has nothing to do with the human existence, or our ability to critical think, or our ability to know right from wrong, good from bad. And that's why today we're lost, because we have no footing.
That's why we're worth a social security number to our government. We're just a number. I agree with you when you say maybe they're not best of intentions for designing the system. I said that specifically directed at people who implemented it. I know teachers who had the best of intentions. I know my parents had the best of intentions. But those people with good intentions who often actually hurt the people they love the most by just perpetuating a story. We're a product of the environment that we grow up in. If you grow up in an environment that tells you you can be, do, and have anything you want, you're going to be much different. If you grow up in an environment that tells you you have to follow all the rules, you're going to be a rule follower. So we're going to be a product of the environment. But that's not to say that the people who created that container for us didn't do it with good intentions. I agree with you at the high level, maybe the governmental level, the Rockefeller level, maybe not the best intentions. Or maybe it was. Maybe it was just for a different time. You know, in 1913, that's kind of what society needed, wasn't it?
It depends. I mean, you're right. There was an industrialization that was beginning, and there was a lot of manufacturing and industrial jobs that were you needed the manpower to go in that direction. So I will absolutely give you that. But I also know the academies that the wealthy went to at the time, they were learning some of financial planning, how to do their taxes so that they get the biggest benefit. They were learning philosophy and logic and how to look for fallacies. They were doing higher end learning because they wanted to produce leaders within their kind, and they weren't doing that sort of teaching for the general public. So you're right. In insofar as did that method of teaching everyone to be a good worker, was it a means to an end? It was. It was because America blew up and grew up. We manufactured so many things. Made in America was unbelievable. It was the beginning of an industrial age like we've never seen again. So for certain, that is the case. But I think at the same time, the soul was ripped out of the human being. The ability to be individualistic, the ability to have self-reliance, the ability to say, what about me? Because in doing so, we became a collective. We became, I say the word homogenized. We lost our individuality, and we lost our capacity to say no.
Yeah, I mean, we became programmed, and we can talk. We'll talk about education in another episode. But you know, we became a social security number. That's not sovereignty. You know, if we talk about what does it mean to be an individual, so to be known as a social security number, to be known in a court system by all capital letters, you know, the individual Inc., which most Americans don't even realize that's how the court system sees you. Yeah, I mean, it does. It dehumanizes us and it programs us. But here's the thing: we let it happen. We let it happen because there are some people who stood up and said, I'm not going to fall for it. And there's other people who said, well, why does this have to be my identity? And I think the beautiful thing today is there's an awakening. There's more people today. You know, sovereignty is a word that for me growing up, I never heard that term other than I primarily just heard it in church, like related to God. But the idea of an individual with individual rights, it's actually a term that kind of fell out of the human, I should say, the national vocabulary. And it's come back. It's like made a huge comeback. I hear it everywhere because there's such a thirst and a desire to reclaim that sovereignty. And that's really what we're saying is when you step into who you are, when you decide, like, and that's literally it. You just decide, Nelson. And I want you to talk about that because you and I've had great conversations about moments in your life when you decided. For me, the first time was when I read Think and Grow Rich. It changed my mind. Literally overnight, my entire paradigm shifted. Rich Dad, Poor Dad was one of those books that shifted my paradigm overnight. But when you decide you want to do something different, how fast can it happen? And the answer is it's that fast. But it starts with a decision. Talk about that a little bit and some of how you've applied that.
I was a kid. I was 20 some years old. Tony Robbins was a slender man who wore, I remember he wore a blue suit that was entirely too big for his enormous body. He's very slender. He wore a bright red tie everywhere. And this was the beginning when he first had his personal power cassettes. And he had very small meetings. And I went to go see him. I was a student at first in Long Beach, California, at a junior college, and then at Cal State Fullerton in Fullerton, California, for a bachelor's. And I went to go see him several times, and he blew me away in the middle of the night because he couldn't afford infomercials other than starting at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. And I would stay up and watch the guy, and I was so enthusiastic about what he was saying. He was talking the words of Jim Rohn and others. He was going back also into classical philosophy and classical psychology, and I was into those subjects even as a kid. But he absolutely revolutionized my thinking. I would write everything he said, and I would fill entire books with it, and then I'd go back and reread it, and it happened to contradict most of the things I was learning in class at the time. In school, in college, that had a massive impact on me, and that started me on my path of I'm going to be a business owner, not a wage earner. I'm going to be a business owner, not an employee. I'm going to be a business owner. I'm not going to look for a job. So even though Tony wasn't saying those words, he was filling me with this power, this personal power. That coupled with Robert Kiyosaki and the 4 quadrants. Yeah. The employee who's the highest taxpayer, the individual contractor who pays a little less in taxes, the business owner who pays even less, and ultimately the investor who pays little, if any, taxes at all. And I couldn't believe how simplistic that was. And that took me in a very young age to buying my first beat-up home that I fixed personally, and I flipped it for a small profit, which got me into my second home. And I did it a few times until I got into apartment complexes. But again, both of these men shaped my life, and they made me look in the mirror and reanalyze what everyone had ever said to me, whether it's my parents or teachers or anyone else. And it gave me a level of umph like nothing else. It reshapes everything. And I'm certain my destination would have been otherwise had it not been for these two men.
Yeah. Both of those guys had a serious impact in my life as well. But, in the case of Robert Kiyosaki, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad while I was building my recording studio back in 2004, 2003, 2004. And I converted, we had a very sizable basement that I had converted into a recording studio, which is very common here in Nashville. And as I was reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I started to think about passive income, I started to think about the idea of I can have something that I'm working, and it's a thing. You can call it an asset, but really it's a liability because it's an expense. But what if I owned something that would pay me? And I redesigned my production studio in the middle of building it so that I can have 2 control rooms working off the same central room, and I could work in one and I could rent the other one out while I was working. And there were months during the time that I owned that studio that I had no work, but I actually had people renting the other room, and it created cash flow for me. It was my first experience with passive cash flow. And I got that concept from Robert Kiyosaki. And, both of those guys, Napoleon Hill being a third one, those little ideas, those nuggets change the direction of someone's life. But let's kind of bring this back. As we wrap this up, if I could kind of coach anybody who's listening, if they were to say, hey, I want something to walk away with, I want to challenge you to this. Everybody, every human being, it's part of our human nature to feel a little bit victimized when things aren't going the way we want. Oh, I can't believe that my employer did this. I can't believe that such and such company did that. Are they out to scam me? Fill in the blank, right? Why does Elon Musk have all the money in the world? We should just tax him and then, forget the rest of the citizens. I just want you, whatever that thought is, I want to challenge everybody to ask the question, what if that were not true? What if that thought were not true? What if I make the statement, Elon Musk should be taxed and we should redistribute all of his wealth to the rest of the world? What if I stop in the middle of that statement and say, that's not a true statement? Once we ask the question, what if that's not true? We open ourselves up to what else might be true. And on the other side of that, we actually start to pull the string and unravel the answer to the thing that we're resisting. It's like Tony used to always say, what you resist persists, right? People resist wealth. They literally tell wealth to stay away by judging the people who have it. Oh, I can't believe he has so much money. Well, I can't believe he's driving that nice Mercedes, or she's driving a Porsche. She shouldn't be driving a Porsche. She should be in a pink Cadillac. No, I'm just kidding. They're resisting. They're putting out with their words, wealth, stay away. So I want to challenge people, and I want you to tag on to this, what your thoughts are about this, but I want to challenge people, when you have that thought, When you feel even the smallest amount of emotion negative towards somebody because they have more than you, just blurt out, what if that were not true? What if that statement were not true? And see where your unconscious mind will go.
We 2 videos ago, we spoke about, you made a statement, and my response to you was, we don't want and we don't want to need, because our environment will look at us and say, oh, you were without. You're in a position of less than, and therefore I will create an environment at your perimeter that mimics what you think about yourself as someone who needs, as someone who wants. So if I say that Elon Musk or any individual has too much and we should gut him like a fish and share it with everybody else, we're admitting that we believe in scarcity, that we don't believe that there's enough dollar bills for all of us. He's got the bigger brunt, and therefore let's just, rather than fish for ourselves, that dude's full of fish. Let's go on his boat and steal his fish. That's a fallacy. And that goes back to what I was trying to say earlier. We do not have the capacity or the training to see a fallacy and go, that is not true. That isn't true. Because there's an excess of dollar bills. They print them at will. And that's another fallacy by the working class, which says there's only so much money. And that is not true. And again, I know this is a little bit controversial. Many people believe there's only so much water, there's only so many minerals, there's only so much oil, and none of that is true. Those scarcity fears are put into us so that we live in a state of anxiety.
Yeah.
But it isn't true. Just like there's no limit to the amount of love we have. There's no limit to the amount of goodness a person can give and do and be. But these are not behaviors that are encouraged. We're not taught those things in school. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. We're taught to be a good, obedient worker. We used to raise our hands to go to the bathroom, so we don't see ourselves as mighty, as abundant, as prosperous, and more importantly, as deserving.
Yeah.
We think in terms of scarcity, and therefore we think small, we make small bets, we work in small increments, and we don't realize that by doing so, we're telling the universe, we're small, so treat us as small. Ensure to give us small results.
There's only one thing I'm going to push back on. You said we don't have the capacity, and I disagree with that. We all have the capacity. We have turned it off. It has been indoctrinated into us that you don't have the capacity. I think that I'm going to say, what if that's not true? I believe all of us have the capacity, but we have to open it up. We have to say, okay, what if? And that's such a powerful statement. What if this could be true? Nelson, somebody says, I want to make $10 million a year. It can never happen. And you come back and you say, what if you could? Most people will say, I don't know what I would do with it. And that's why they can't have it. Because they never ask the question, what if?
I'm going to add something small to that, if I may. There's people who actually do accomplish their dream. They have a magic number. Let's assume it's 1 million or 2 million or whatever, 100,000, whatever it is. But because they've only dreamt that far and they've never dreamt beyond that, they've never planned beyond that, they'll lose it readily. They'll lose it because there's no direction with it, right?
Yeah.
But going back to what you're saying, you're right. We all have the capacity naturally to change. I've been impacted by, I told you, Tony and Robert. But there's been a lot of mentors in a multitude of books that I've read and have, and teachers and professors and older people I conversed with when I was young that have served me enormously. And there's no doubt that I was a socialist atheist once, my friend, when I was a young man in college. I thought that was cool. And so we all...
What else would be cool?
So true. But we all have that capacity to change. We certainly do. But it almost seems like we're in a system that is ensured that we don't have the tools to make changes, much less see that our compliance to the system, our protection of the system, our defense of the system isn't a truism. It isn't altruism, not by any means. It isn't something that people should applaud to, and yet that's what we do with one another. When you defend the system and say, you need a bachelor's, you need a master's, you need a doctorate, and everyone nods and says yes, but the multitudes of super wealthy that aren't interested in those things, that never finished their college degree, some of them, they didn't finish high school, they're super wealthy, they have a completely different understanding of the world around them. Both Tony Robbins and Kiyosaki, neither of them went to college. And look at the size of their not just their wealth, but their capacity to influence the world around them. It's limitless.
Absolutely. Okay, as we start to wrap this up, I want you to give some action steps to our listeners. Coming from Nelson's action steps. If we were to say, okay, we're going to break the hypnosis, we're going to break the trance, and we're going to say, you know what, I do have the capacity. What are some action steps off the top of your head that someone can say, I want to take more responsibility for myself, I'm going to break the pattern, and I'm going to expand my thinking?
My immediate thing is question everything. Make a list of all the things that you believe are convictions that you would never, ever change. Look at them for what they are. Make a list of 1 through 10 or 1 through 20. And size them up of your definition of what is a man, what is a husband, what is a father, what is a homeowner, what's a person within a community. Make a list of those things, whatever those notions are. Then make another list of what do you love to do? Where do you like to spend your time? Are you a reader? Are you a writer? Are you a jogger? Do you like to tear things apart and put them back together? Are you a mathematician? Where do you fall in the spectrum of life? Where do you spend your time? And last but not least, what are you good at? Because a lot of times what we do and what we like to do don't always coincide. Yep. If they do in this particular case, it'll make, when we're done doing that, and that's what I call a self-diagnostics, we come and look at things and go, my goodness, you know what? I could see why my dad thought that, but it doesn't apply here to me. It doesn't apply in my moment in time or in my particular relationship. Or I could see how this really was useful for my dad raising us, but that's not my definition. I don't want to do that with my kids, right? So it allows us a level of clarity that then for the first time we say, I always wanted to write a book. Or you know what? I think I could be a programmer. Or you know what? I've spent enough time on the computer at night with AI. I think I could code. I can make a bot. So once we have that, we can create a roadmap after that. So my plan of action would be run a self-diagnostics, look in the mirror, measure your convictions, and come out with a plan on the other side.
I love that. And that's actually a lot of what I do with our coaching clients whenever we work with them. If that's the issue we're working on, we sit there and we work through values. We work through, what are your rules that you're living by that you don't even know? We have these incredible rules that we live by. We don't even realize it. It's just part of the human condition right now. But, okay, my feedback would be this. Take 5 minutes, close your eyes, and imagine a life that you never dreamed you could have, whether it be traveling, amount of money that you might attain, a life that you never thought you could have. This is my exercise. And spend 5 minutes just visualizing that. And then ask, your unconscious mind's instantly going to say, yeah, that's not real for me. So then here's the step. Ask why not and what if. Ask yourself what if it could be real. Don't get caught up in the logistics of how. Get caught up in the vision of what could be. As Napoleon Hill said, if you can conceive it, that's the idea, that's the vision, and you can believe it, you can achieve it. So let's start with vision. Vision before logistics, right? Get the vision and say, what if it could be? Because I'm going to tell you, I'm planting new seeds now. You can be, do, and have anything you dream. You can be, do, and have anything you want. You are limited only by the stories you tell yourself and the actions you take. The end.
Bravo. That's it, brother.
Nelson, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Great chat.
What a pleasure. Incredible. I love the ending on there. Happy evening, brother. Be well.